I'd like to introduce Jim Vieira. Second time having him here, and I really, for those of you who sat in on the panel earlier, I really appreciate his very grounded, everyman kind of perspective on all of these spiritual concepts. I think many people experience those things, but we don't have a lot of teachers in this space who can speak to that perspective. But anyway, today he's going to be speaking about Atlantis, a subject that is very much fascinating to me personally as well. So I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say. So welcome back to Detroit.
Thank you, Ethan. My spirit animal. I'm going to throw a lot of information at you, but I'll do the talking, I'll do the reading. Just try to chill out and don't be overwhelmed, hopefully. Essentially, what I do is a comparative analysis of does this sound cool? It's not too tinny or anything. Of a number of sources to tell the history of the past of the planet through the eyes of mystics, Edgar Cayce, Steiner, Blavatsky, the Rosicrucians and Freemasons, oral traditions around the planet, Plato, and they're all essentially saying the same strange and specific thing about the past, which is they all claim that Atlantis existed. It was the birthplace of a lot of the metaphysical teachings that we practice, that androgynous created gods were the ones who basically created Homo sapiens, and that there was a great cataclysm, and after the flood, these beings showed up, which I'll get into, like hybrid beings carrying strange bags and fish gods, and they basically show up all around the world teaching metaphysical principles and the arts of civilization. So I'll go through all these different sources and show you what I'm saying is correct. And what I like about it is I fell into this backwards, in reverse, just studying different things and having a curious mind. I'm not making up a grand theory myself. I'm trying to step back from the ego and saying all these sources that bypass the ego, people like Plato, who we really respect, and these mystical traditions are all saying the same strange and specific thing. So that's that all the points I'm hitting is weird and sidetracking as it may appear are all coming to that same conclusion. I'll give a little background of myself. This is my brother Bill. We're stonemasons. We live in Asheville, Massachusetts. You might be able to tell. Grew up in Boston. This is some of the stonework projects we've done. Working for about 20 years. We did this pool. You ever watch or listen to NPR? Tom Bodette, he's the Motel 6 guy. He's funny. We did this for him and his wife up in Vermont. This is my exhale. He walking on my wall. Sad emoji. You'll see a little of my love life. This is a project we're working on. The oldest road in the county is Bug Hill Road in Asheville. It's about 2 miles long, and we've been rebuilding all the walls on the road. We had to bring in from my buddy's farmer's clearing pile about 100 tons of stone, truck by truck, walking them the back, section of the wall through the water to create this. So we're doing that because when I'm not doing stonework, I'm doing stonework. We did this fountain. This is cool too. This is Tom's place. That's in Dummerston, Vermont. And we just finished this arch for Ben and Jen, friends of mine in Asheville, which is cool. I never did an arch before, and that's actually standing on its own, and we stood on top of it too. So this is my brother and I looking tough. This is a show we did for the History Channel. Our first show was called Search for the Lost Giants, and this is my office. It was called The Daily Giant, which is funny. And I had these accounts of giant skeletons being unearthed by professionals, academics, lay people over a 200-year period, and I tacked them all around the walls of my office like the Zodiac Killer, so it was kind of really funny. We also did a number of specials on the lost colony of Roanoke. Actually, our story and our investigations made it into the Washington Post and a National Geographic article too. We found a massive Native American settlement while filming in real time that had never been found before, and possibly ancient Native American copper mines that were never found in the second part. So it was Search for the Lost Colony. I've been on with this idiot, Josh Gates. This guy is funny as hell. You can't believe how twisted, and I'm telling you, man, he's like a supercomputer of outrageous humor, like when you get him off set. I love this guy, you know. I've been on with Megan Fox and her show too, and Megan's brilliant. She's into Edgar Cayce and Atlantis. I recommended a book that I'll recommend at the end, The Disappearance of the Universe, about non-dualism in the Course in Miracles. She read the whole thing, and she's a brilliant, being who's really just quite advanced and understands sophisticated metaphysics. It's really nice to have people in Hollywood who get it. So I also did a spot for Code of the Wild and these guys. It's airing next week on Travel. We investigate the lost city of giants in Ecuador. I also did a show Uncharted for National Geographic about the Templar mystery that will air in a couple months. And next week I'm going to New York to film a spot for Ancient Aliens. I can't give the content, but I think it'll be a really groundbreaking episode and very weird, which is right in my wheelhouse. So Edgar Cayce was a mystic, grew up in Hopkinsville, Kentucky in 1877. And I won't give the long bio on him, but he essentially went into a trance state, and he was a very conservative Christian, very pious man. All he did was read the Bible. He had an 8th grade education, and he started to go into a trance state and give health readings for people. It'd be like, you're Ohio, go to the pharmacy on the 3rd shelf. It's just amazing the effectiveness of his readings. He's basically the father of holistic medicine. And in his readings, these strange ideas started to come through. He started to talk about past lives in Atlantis and Lemuria. And he was kind of shocked and turned off because reincarnation doesn't meld with conservative Christianity, although Jesus taught it. It's kind of set aside by the Council of Nicaea. So Cayce was reluctant, but he kept going, and they asked more and more questions about Atlantis. And so I will touch on Cayce's readings and how they line up with other mystics and secret societies. I'll just give a quick background about how I got into this field. My ex, Kimmy, this is my son, Kyle, she had a severe case of ulcerative colitis, and she was essentially bleeding to death. And they were going to take out her large intestine. She was like 80 pounds after bleeding. And I took her to home to die with dignity because I knew she couldn't survive the surgery. And then I'm crying. It's like a scene from a Lifetime movie or something. And I get a call from a naturopath that I was investigating a piece of electromedical Royal Rife equipment for. Because I started just allopathic medicine, you're going round and round and round. There's got to be another way. So he says, extreme case of ulcerative colitis, we can heal her. And I'm like, this guy has so much confidence for such a, seemingly intractable disorder. I took her to him, and after the first session with electromedical equipment and some other steps, I would grow wheatgrass juice and she would drink 8 ounces a day twice and do implants to heal her inflamed intestines and rebuild her immune system. But she immediately started to get better. And now she's basically symptom-free, which is, if you know colitis, it's like Crohn's disease. It's like, yes. So then my son Kyle was another case of there is another way. There's a holistic approach to medicine. Kyle was adopted. We got him when he was 3. Very, 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 very difficult background. Abuse and neglect. I don't want to get to the story. We took him in and we'd have night terrors all night long. He'd sleep maybe an hour or 2. And my neighbor and friend at the time taught neurofeedback, which is a newer form of biofeedback. So we got him into therapy, and within 2 weeks, all his night terrors went away, and he would sleep 8 and 10 hours. And I just founded this remarkable holistic intervention. And then I basically took on the system in Massachusetts for the Department of Children and Family Services and said, this is something, there's so many kids take medications for, what happens is when you have reactive attachment disorder, which is one of the most intractable mental health disorders, when you're separated from your mother. It's like Russian orphans and Romanian orphans suffer from this. It's like your nervous system, your brain is cycling in the high range, and it trains your mind or the brain back through video games and interaction back into that 14 hertz joyful detachment zone. And I took it and I appealed, and I went up against Russell Barkley, a doctor from Worcester who did trials for Novartis about Ritalin, and he called this pseudoscience, which pissed me off, and I ended up, pushing and going to conferences and speaking for 6 years at the National Conference for Abused and Neglected Children about the efficacy of neurofeedback. So once again, a real-life example of something extraordinary. Now, this idiot over here, when I was playing football in high school, I got a traumatic brain injury, right? So just cerebrospinal fluid, I got blasted. I scored the touchdown, though. It was like an 80-yard run. I know, it's pathetic. So like all the fluid comes out. I'm like in La La Land, and my coach, he's all fired up, and I told him, I said, whoa, something just happened. And he's like, go out there, right? So my brain's all swollen up. We know so much more about CTE and brain injuries now. And what happened a little later, a couple of years later, I started to get waves of seizures, petit mal seizures, and a couple of grand mal seizures. And I would get incredibly depressed for weeks. I couldn't crack a smile. My entire world turned gray. And I really, it was, if anybody suffered, a lot of us have, like that crushing depression, there's nothing worse. And so I got into alternative means to, therapy, self-reflection, EMDR, neurofeedback, nutritional therapy, meditation. And essentially now I take no medication. I haven't had a seizure in 15 years, no auras or anything like that. And I went to the hospital several times with grand mal seizures, like 8, 9. My ex and my son had to watch me convulse for 9 minutes, and they didn't know what it was. And I'm like checked out, and they're so traumatized. So it's a really profound healing that happened, right? So my thing is, there are all these examples in life that a holistic approach needs to be taken in all academic and scientific disciplines. So that's what I bring to ancient mysteries, history, anthropology. Linus. And here's my research partner, Linus. Yeah, right? He's got one blue eye and one yellow eye. It's another glamour shot. So Linus, he's really not my research partner. All he does is like walk on my computer, and like I lose all my info, but I forgive him. And my brother and I had 17 cats once. We took in 17 cats, and then we took care of them and stuff. So we're cat guys. So Linus, like, he sleeps, he'll like push his body up against mine and lay his spine along mine, which is cool. I guess it's, you're not really tough if you're talking about cats. But Linus is awesome, and here he is, pretending to be a stuffed animal. I know, isn't he? That's another thing. I got like 20 stuffed animals. That's so funny because, like, on the surface, whatever. So back to Edgar Cayce. Most of what Cayce said was just like kind and thoughtful advice. Anyone can find fault. It is the wise person who finds that which encourages another in the turmoils and strifes of the day. So what he talked about, and I alluded to, was he talked about Atlantis existing. He said 210,000 years ago, it existed in the middle of the Atlantic, and that's when it was founded. He talks more about a descension into matter, and other sources say extraterrestrial beings founded Atlantis in 210,000 BC. There was a series of destructions in 5028, and then the final 13,000 years ago that occurred. So Atlantis bit the dust. And we're a lot like Atlantis. There was a lot of people that were highly spiritually oriented, and a lot of the population that was asleep at the wheel. So we're reliving this. A lot of these themes, like I'll get into it, like gender and race, and a lot that's going on now is a watered-down version of what already occurred. So we know scientifically that this cataclysm existed or occurred. So it's called the Younger Dryas impact theory. So a recent ice age was triggered 12,800 years ago. And it set off global firestorms. So 10% of the Earth's landmass was destroyed 12,800 years ago. And I've talked and worked with a lot of scientists they belong to the Comet Research Group. and they are investigating the evidence for this cataclysm. So we know that there was a cataclysmic flood and a cometary impact. Like we see a comet, it's like, oh cool. The ancients said it was the omen of destruction, the broom star. You know, it's like, oh, they're just superstitious weirdos. It's like, no, they understood, and that lineage got passed down of these kind of events. So all the way down to Patagonia, they have found evidence for this impact. If you watch Ancient Aliens, my buddy Andrew Collins is always on, and Hancock, and a lot of the academically oriented researchers who are alternative are talking about this event too. And even in Greenland, they found 2 craters that look like they are the impact craters for the Younger Dryas impact. In a relatively recent BBC article, geologist Daniel Parsons is quoted as saying about Monterey Canyon off the coast of California, if you drained all the water away, it would look exactly like a river system with bends and meanders, except there are not trees along the banks. Now, I've been working with a geologist named Michael Jay, who taught at the Naval College in California, and he believes Atlantis existed. And he believes that there was some kind of cataclysm that forced the land in the Pacific and the Atlantic, like from to be like 2 miles down. So in the 70s, Russian scientific team did core samples on the Mid-Atlantic Range and found that it was above water 15,000 years ago. Now that's something I've been working with, doing different shows. It might be expensive, but to get a research vessel out there and do the test again, because this idea is scoffed at by geologists and anthropologists and archaeologists, like, it's a fairy tale, on and on and on. So you need scientific validation. So here it is right here. This is what he's talking about in Monterey. Also same evidence in the Atlantic, that there's basically, it was above land at one point. So this is a reading from Cayce about Atlantis. Please give a few details regarding the physiognomy, habits, customs, and costumes of the people of Atlantis during the period before the first destruction. This is what Cayce says. They took on many sizes as to stature, from that which may be called the midget to the giants, for were the giants in the earth in those days, men as tall as what would be termed today 10 to 12 feet in stature and well proportioned throughout. I wrote a book about this called Giants on Record with my buddy Hugh Newman, where I go through hundreds and hundreds of academic accounts from the early Smithsonian scientists, heads of anthropology and archaeology, laymen, scientists, whoever, for a 200-year period, kind of verifying this idea that there were survivors, and we know the biblical tradition of giants. So Cayce, like all those other sources, Blavatsky, the Rosicrucians, or Freemasons, all say that giants existed in the past. And now we have a lot of evidence around the Denisovans, a human cousin that was found to exist 40,000 years ago that interbred with humans. And the only evidence they have is massive teeth and now new massive jawbones. Penguin man found off the coast of Taiwan, and recently, it's like a couple months ago, a massive jaw with massive teeth found in a Tibetan cave. So the Denisovans were our human cousin who interbred with us 40,000 years ago. And hobbits were found in Indonesia in 2001, a 3-foot tall human cousin. So these ideas of giants and little people are gaining scientific verification. So we know Plato talked about Atlantis in the Timaeus and Critias. Egypt has recorded and kept eternally the wisdom of the old times, all coming from a time immemorial when gods governed the earth and the dawn of civilization. Now, my boy John was saying that the gods, these beings were turned into gods, and I'll get into that, these androgynous beings. But Atlantis was called the realm of the gods, where everybody was long-lived, and they had like almost supernatural abilities. And they existed in the Atlantic alongside hunter-gatherer groups like the Solutreans and other people. So we're not talking about a completely supernatural thing. We're just talking about a civilization that was founded by extraterrestrial beings who had heightened abilities and supernatural abilities. So the Library of Alexandria held all this knowledge, right? I'm still pissed. There's literary evidence of Greek individuals visiting Egypt, especially to acquire knowledge, Herodotus and Plato. And so they would go to the Library of Alexandria, and that's where they learned a lot about Atlantis, as well as from Solon, Plato's grandfather. One of the arguments of the skeptics is that nobody really talked about Atlantis. Plato was the only one to. In fact, Herodotus, who lived before Plato, actually talks about Atlantis as a reality. So the father of history says, near the salt hills of a mountain named Atlas, after this mountain, these received their name, for they were called the Atlanteans. He also refers to the sea beyond the Pillars of Heracles as the Sea of Atlantis. There was a new shipwreck found that proved that Herodotus wasn't lying about Egyptian boats. Science is verifying a lot of these controversial things that I will be saying. Diodorus. The Atlantides inhabited a rich country bordering upon the ocean, and they boast that gods were born among them. In a word, this island is so delightful that it appears to be the abode of the gods rather than of human beings. They're alluding to, the Garden of Hesperides, this place of eternal marvels. So Pliny also says, beyond the Aquilion, one finds a blessed nation called, according to tradition, the Hyperboreans. Among them, men reaching extreme age. Many marvels are told of this people, and is bathed in sunlight in enjoys a pleasant temperature. It was located from the Canary Islands to around Bimini as one continent. That's what's talked about. And then it got broken into islands over time. So Aelian says this. Theopompus relates the particulars of an interview between Midas, king of Phrygia, and Selenius. This is interesting, and I'll get into the hybrid thing. Selenius was a minotaur, or centaur, and he gives this talk about it, or this interview about Atlantis, and this is what he says. Europe, Asia, and Libya are islands washed on all their shores by the ocean, and there is but one continent which is situated outside these limits. Its expanse is immense. It produced very large animals and people twice as tall as those common to our climate, and they live twice as long. All the sources say the same thing. That basically we've devolved into beings who don't live as long and don't have like an open third eye and things like that. He also talks about the Atlantean kings. Anagygia is talked about by Homer. And if you read Homer, just like Troy was found by Schliemann in the late 1800s and was proven to be a real city, he is alluding to Atlantis in Aegygia. It's an island mentioned by Homer in the Odyssey, home of the Titan Atlas, known as Atlantis. So Strabo says that Aegygia was located in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. All these great chroniclers are saying the same thing. Plutarch says the Aegean Isle lies far out to sea, 5 days distant sail from Britain going westwards, and 3 equally distant from it. Aegygia was destroyed by the Aegean flood. And this is a quote that not many people know about, that Plato says that this flood occurred 10,000 years before his time. So the Younger Dryas impact event was 12,900 years ago. He's saying 12,600 years ago, pretty close. And he's saying that the flood didn't happen 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. It was 10,000 years ago. So Rudolf Steiner talked quite a bit about Atlantis. Everything that refers to giants and legends is absolutely based on knowledge of the truth. We feel it to be absolutely correct from the spiritual, scientific point of view, that the giants are stupid and the dwarfs are clever. Dissing the giants. The Rosicrucians. This is one thing I found. I did a TEDx talk, and it was the #1 watched TEDx talk in the world. Got like 150,000 views in the first week, and then it got taken down because it was viewed as unscientific, controversial. Actually, at the end, I started to go off on the Koch brothers, giving money to the Smithsonian. So I was pissed. I was all worked up, you know. And it got taken down, but I wasn't like, I was just saying, what you'll see, isn't this interesting? You know, I'm not saying this is true, like the strange and specific nature of all these accounts, all these reports. That's all I was pointing to. So it shows that I'm not anti-science at all, but academia is like, it's like an atheistic cult now, really. Like my friends who are scientists, they're more afraid of ayahuasca than they are Atlantis, you know? It's like inability to open the mind to these wider realities. So the Rosicrucians basically say there were giants in the earth, and the patriarchs lived for centuries. In this issue, we explore the mysteries of the lost continent of Atlantis, one of the most powerful enduring ideas of the Western world and of Rosicrucian heritage. Not many people know that. So here's a great account right here. My buddy Richard Casaro of The Occultist gave it to me. The old masters who made it the object of their lives to gather together once more the scattered fragments, reconstruct the occult doctrine of Atlantis. They found a portion of the material in all these places, the Kabbalah, the Zohar, on and on. So at the last, the secret doctrine of the Rosicrucians may be said to be the secret doctrine of Atlantis. Of the Atlantis? Wrong. Transmitted through the descendants of the people of that great center of occult knowledge. So all these secret societies and mystics are saying that Atlantis was the birthplace of sophisticated metaphysical principles that many of us practice now. And I'll get in more into what was going on there in the Law of One. Rosicrucian science confirmed. Giant skeletons. The Freemasons also had the same belief about giants in Atlantis. My son put these things in here, man. Like Manly P. Hall, great mystic, one of the greatest, possibly the greatest Freemason thinker, has this to say. I think there's a quote here too, but he wrote an entire chapter, Atlantis and the Gods of Antiquity. Or maybe not, I'll get into his quotes later. Blavatsky, same thing. Although altered in the general aspect, Plato's narrative bears the impressive truth upon it. It was not he who invented it at any rate, since Homer, who preceded him by many centuries, also speaks of the Atlanteans and of their island in his Odyssey. Therefore, the tradition was older than the Bard of Ulysses. So she's pointing to not just Herodotus, but Homer talking about Atlantis. And that's one of the main arguments of the skeptics, that, you know, this is all smoke and mirrors and some like moral allegory, which it isn't. So even the Bible is loaded with giant accounts, excuse me, and accounts of the Great Flood. And Cayce gave a reading about the mound builder culture in our country in the eastern half. The entity sojourns then were with a race of unusual height, unusual proportions to what may be termed in the present. They were the lords of the land. And there's a book I wrote, my buddy Hugh Newman and I, we're writing a new one about the giants of the British Isles right now. Same story, oral traditions, historical accounts, and that was a labor of love. It took about 8 years. My friends at the Edgar Cayce ARE Center in Virginia Beach, Van Auken and Greg and Laura Little wrote this book about Cayce's readings about the mound builders. He has readings about all different aspects of health and ancient mysteries, but he gave 68 readings about the ancient mound building cultures of the United States, which has really got me fascinated about American archaeology. I had no idea that sites like this existed in Collinsville, Missouri, 100-foot high place called Cahokia. That's Monk's Mound, around 900 to 1200 AD. It was built, 14-acre base, 1 acre larger than the Great Pyramid. Just these incredible ancient cities that Native Americans built in burial mounds and geometric forms. Grave Creek, West Virginia. Just incredible engineering projects. There were geometric forms everywhere. Newark, Ohio, predicting eclipses through the octagon and circle. And they understood the 18.61 metonic cycle of the moon and could predict eclipses. And we are taught that Native Americans were basically disorganized and unsophisticated. And that was part of the narrative to steal the land from Native people. Now, they were incredibly connected in general and had this ancient wisdom and knowledge that was unbelievable. So you can't destroy and celebrate a culture at the same time. So these manifest destiny ideas, they bled into the idea of giants and that native chiefs who were enormous. The shamans were 7, 8 feet tall and were the wisdom keepers and had the bloodline, the royal bloodline, and they were found buried in the mounds a lot. So we kind of lost that to history based on a lot of incredible racism and ignorance. So right here, Hively and Horn, two Earlham College professors, showed up in the 80s at Newark trying to disprove and take a skeptical approach that there was no alignments at this place, no solar alignments. And what they found is that it was actually a lunar calendar. So they went in with the opposite intention and came out stunned. Here it is from the air. It's now a golf course now. So it's, yeah, get caught in the rough. So you had like hundreds and hundreds of these geometric forms. It looked like a geometry college blackboard all over the land with precise circles and octagons. And in fact, Cayce said a lot of these mound sites were representations of the lost city of Atlantis. and that the native people would do these ceremonies to remember, like the Cherokee say, they say they were from the Pleiades, but they also say our homeland on earth was Atlantis. And a lot of the tribes say this. And check out that it is just like the central city of Atlantis in Portsmouth, now destroyed. Squire and Davis of the Smithsonian surveyed it, thankfully, and it looks just like the central city of Atlantis. And the scientists and the archaeologists can't figure out what all the moats are about, even in England. And that's what Cayce said. They're representations of the central city where they would do these rituals of remembrance. So, it gets weirder and weirder and weirder as we go. And it's funny because I'm like the straight guy here, you know what I mean? But normally I talk to crowds and I speak at anthropology classes at colleges, and I try to be the goodwill ambassador from the lunatic fringe. I'm saying just look at all how do I express it? View it as just an independent, curious researcher, right? And look at all the similarities that are beyond coincidence. That's what catches my attention. So this is the belief about the gods. And they're not gods. They're extraterrestrial or hybrids. But Cayce says this: in the early days of Aemilius's rule, the separation of the sexes had not yet begun to take place. Though male in their outward aspect, the androgynous sons of God embodied within themselves the nature of both male and female in one person. By turning to the creative forces, they could become channels to bring into being androgynous progeny. They would procreate like amoeba. That's what, and it like split off of themselves, as odd as that sounds. And Cayce said that. With a double-sex soul and a double-sex body, in this way, sexual intercourse was unnecessary as a means of propagation. So I keep going about it wrong, apparently. So even what's his name? H.V. Hilprecht, he was a Sumerian and an Assyriologist in the late 1800s, and he studied the Babylonian culture. It's really fascinating, the early Sumerian researchers like George Smith and what they said. So here is H.V. Hilprecht. This is what he has to say about the Sumerian gods. This androgynous nature, the ability to beget out of himself his own ego, this self-existence is inherent in each and every god of the Sumerians. All Sumerian gods are androgynous. This is this sober academic lining up with this dude in a trance-like state with an 8th grade education talking about how these androgynous gods procreated. And all these other sources say the same things. Like I said, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, we'll get into it. It's like, that is pretty specific, androgyny. It's a bizarre concept, but an attribute of these beings who brought us wisdom and knowledge. This guy, Oannes, I'll talk a lot about, but he was androgynous, meaning he was a sexless being, portrayed as male, had an outward aspect of male, but is known to be a hybrid creature. And he carries a strange bag with him. I'll get into that too. So here is Dagon, the Philistine god, the fish god. Breasts and a beard, displaying the androgynous nature. It was known to be androgynous. So there are fish gods all around the planet. It is very, very odd. And they are the wisdom bringers too. They teach advanced mathematics and geometry and the arts of civilization. All the culture heroes around the planet, which I will allude to, Fu Xi in China, they all teach advanced geometry, mathematics, and all the arts of civilization. So the Dogon people in Mali, you might know them from Robert Temple's book, The Serious Mystery. Go to the Nomo. Or Ogamateli, the blind Dogon elder, was interviewed in the 30s by 2 French anthropologists, and he told all about the oral traditions. And they said that the Nomo were from Sirius, and they were fish gods that were androgynous, hermaphroditic, amphibious beings that taught all this advanced knowledge of the stars, of spiritual disciplines and stuff like that. So all these beings around the planet that are fish gods, he is verifying that they have extraterrestrial roots, if you will. And here an image of the Dogon's Nomo right here. Here is the twin Nomo statue. The 2-headed statue, male and female, is representing the androgynous nature of these gods oftentimes. So Cayce simply compares this type of conception with that of the lowly amoeba, who pushes out from within itself into another separate body, splitting its own gene pool. Here is Fu Shi. This is from a Chinese tomb, about 200 BC. It's an androgynous being, male and female, fish god, amphibious god, taught the I Ching. If you've ever done the I Ching, it's wonderfully sophisticated. This is the Chinese culture hero, like Viracocha in South America, who shows up and teaches, advanced mathematics and geometry. We all know how complex and wonderful the ancient Chinese culture is. And this is the dude who shows up, and he's, I'm sorry if I repeat myself, but I'm just trying to drive home this point of the strange and specific nature of these things. Olokun in West Africa, androgynous, amphibious god. The native people there in Nigeria, they still celebrate that being. They do festivals. In India, Matsya, the same thing. Hindu mythology, preface to Kama Sutra, says, Brahma created humans as androgynous beings who used to reproduce by themselves, impart knowledge to offsprings, and perish. So you see the similar iconography everywhere. Nice, right? Even Viracocha, the hybrid god of the Inca in South America, is portrayed. He is known to be androgynous, and he has fish scales. The Olmec people had their androgynous gods as well. The Olmec was the oldest, before the Maya, culture in central Mexico, a very fascinating culture. The mythologies of many nations contain accounts of gods who came out of the sea. Certain shamans among the American Indians tell of holy men dressed in bird feathers and wampum who rose out of the blue waters and instructed them in the arts and crafts. Among the legends of the Chaldeans is that of Atlantis, a partly amphibious creature who came out of the sea and taught the savage peoples along the shore to read and write, till the soil, cultivate herbs for healing, study the stars, establish rational forms of government, and become conversant with the sacred mysteries. And there he is. And I'll get into what he does in his spare time in a little while. It's pretty interesting. So on the other side of the ocean from Samaria, at the oldest site of Levanta, 1800 BC, is the first representation of the androgynous quasicodal. Some think it's Viracocha also, but this is this androgynous deity. He's holding that strange bag, just like the fish guy, and he has the fish protrusion there, and he is known to be androgynous once again. Pretty specific. Good question. I'll get what's in the bag. Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah. I think it might have been some magic mushrooms. In Plato's Symposium, Aristophanes displays knowledge of the ancient myth of the androgen, according to which our original nature was by no means the same as it is now. When the androgen was split into two halves, the distinct male and female sexes were created. So Alfred North Whitehead says that Western philosophy is a series of footnotes from Plato. Like, we believe everything Plato says. But when he talks about Atlantis, a great flood, and ancient androgyny, it all gets tuned out. But he says the things that all these mystics are saying. He was dialed in. Plato's game was tight, for sure. So here we go. Here is before Zeus cut the male and the female. That's a Greek amphora from like 300 BC. Philo of Alexandria took up Plato's dualistic conception of the creation. References to a race of androgens which once inhabited the world occur in the myths of both East and West. Western tradition, this primordial androgen is to be found in the writings of certain Kabbalists, Gnostics, Neoplatonists, Swedenborgians, and Theosophists. So a very ubiquitous belief about androgyny. The Rosicrucians say the same thing. And they talk about the self-fertilization as well. So this secret society is talking about Atlantis and giants, androgyny, and self-fertilization. And they're not out there with their teachings everywhere, you know, that you initiate yourself, you find these things in the literature. So once again, it's quite odd if it's just a coincidence. Steiner says the same thing, androgynous and single-sexed. And here are some of the gods all around the planet, the androgynous beings. Among the Zunis, this is interesting. For example, the Burdock was assigned the role of what Baum calls androgynous gods in the ritual reenactment of a tribal myth. So Wiwa was a man dressed as a woman. He was either transgender or shifting his gender. And the natives call these people two-spirit people. Like anybody who is gay, lesbian, transgender, they are revered. And Christian culture is in reverse. And they chose the names of the warriors because they were more in alignment with our true one nature and the androgynous nature. So it's kind of a bummer that people who are gay and lesbian and transgender get so much shit because in our society, which is upside down, because they have this ability, this gift, and Native people understood that. So he shows up in Washington, or she does, and it's a buzz in all the newspapers. She meets the president, and it's like Indian princess comes to the White House, right? And they didn't know that it was a guy. It was funny, but that shows kind of the cultural split. But the Zunis, like so many Native American tribes, believe that, you could call it our first state was androgynous. These gods who made us were androgynous, but that androgyny is a reality in our past. So Awana Willona, a deity both male and female, was the only being in the great space of desolation and foggy blackness. That's the Zuni created god. The Rosicrucians of Freemasons have this male and female symbolism, talking, basically displaying androgyny in a hidden fashion through the really fun Dark Ages. And that's what the symbolism is all about. Like, let's keep it below the radar, or we'll end up with the Inquisition knocking on the door. So you see this same iconography. Even the Templars have an androgynous god called Baphomet. Now, people think this is like some satanic figure, but it's nature, it's male and female, it's the balance of opposites. So right here, it's hard to believe that people have already devoted to a singular androgynous deity 20,000 years ago. The Paleolithic structures are quite explicit. So at Gagarian, you find a 22,000-year-old double-headed androgynous statue written about by an academic. So Paleolithic people also had the same inclination to revere the androgynous state. Now, Erod Ziffer wrote an article called The First Adam, Androgyny, and the Ayin Ghazal Two-Headed Bus. Now, Ayin Ghazal is a site, 8200 BC. I think it's on the Israel-Jordan border. And they found some of the oldest statues in the world. And this sober academic is saying that these are androgynous gods from the past. So here are the two-headed statues, and many of them 6 fingers and toes, too. Some of the oldest statues in the world, just like the giant of Gath in the Bible, Samuel 21:20, 6 fingers, 6 toes. It seems to be part of the genetic makeup of these beings. Here they are at the statues of the British Museum. So the sober academic is talking about this. And here are 6 toes right now, one of the statues right in Ghazal. And this is what he says in his paper. I would like to suggest that these statues represented mythical ancestors from the dawn of mankind, and that the two-headed bus among them represent the first human being, the androgynous prototype of humanity. Now, I keep wanting to interview him on the show. It's kind of weird and esoteric stuff, but once again, a sober academic is pointing to all these metaphysical sources, and it shows up in the oldest statues all around the world. That's something to pay attention to, or that's quite interesting. Kultepe, you have these two-headed statues everywhere. Janus, Roman. Ireland, Boa Island, you have the two-headed androgynous god, male on one side, female on the other. Right, this being right here, there's 2 androgynous freaks. At the Olmec display in Mexico City, this guy is, did I get it? Yeah, right here. Human asexuado. He is an androgynous god with this halo. It's just amazing, And once again, I fell into this backwards. I wasn't like, I got to prove this case. It was like in reverse. Manly P. Hall says the same thing. The creator represented an image. Various subtle devices were employed to indicate its hermaphroditic nature. The Iswara of the Hindu is depicted with one side male, the other female. In Greek and Roman statuary, frequent examples are found of a masculine divinity wearing female garments and vice versa. So, at the Temple of Esna in Egypt, Khnum on the right is creating humans on a potter's wheel. Now, Khnum is androgynous, The temple of Esna was dedicated to an androgynous, nameless, omnipotent creator god, which manifested itself as both the male god Khnum, Khnum Ra, and the female deity Neith. Encyclopedia of Egyptology. Edgar Cayce says that Atlantean survivors showed up in South America and built some of the astonishing stonework there, Sacsayhuam and Pumapunku. They showed up in Egypt and they were founders of the Egyptian civilization, and that the Great Pyramid of Egypt was built between 10,400 BC and 10,300 BC. The grand architect being an incarnation of Jesus, Thoth, Hermes Trismegistus, and Cayce was with him as Ra-Ta. So those two constructed the pyramid complex, which isn't a tomb, we all know that, as a tool of initiation. Like you sit in the sarcophagus, right, to burn off like all that is false. And when Napoleon went with a team of scientists, he sat in the coffin, and it is noted that he came out gray and ashen and sick because he was so negatively oriented, which is funny. So Cayce says it was not built in 2750 BC, but it is vastly older, just like the Sphinx and the Assyrian and other temples in Egypt, which I find very interesting. And founded by androgynous deities like Khnum. He is like right there. Humans are being created on the potter's wheel. You can't get around the symbolism and what it's trying to say. So like if we were dropped off on this planet and things were the way that science tells us they were, it'd be like, oh, the Great Spirit sent the people through the north to settle here. You know, it'd be a very mundane story. Instead, we have a complete freak show all around the planet with hybrids and androgynous beings. And like I said, if you weren't indoctrinated into Western thinking and you were dropped here and you saw all this information, you'd be like, holy hell, there's another story here, you know? And he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I do an entire lecture on 6 fingers and 6 toes. Fiji, Hawaii, Easter Island, I can't tell you, all over the US, giant hands and feet with 6 fingers and 6 toes, etched in the stone, with accounts of creator gods. So 6 fingers and 6 toes is an attribute that is associated with Atlanteans and Lemurians. Edgar Cayce gives a reading, 9028 BC, a being called Muzen shows up from the lost continent of Lemuria into the Gobi Desert. And he is blonde hair, blue-eyed, and has 6 fingers and 6 toes. And Cayce says that's his one reading he talks about it. So just another kind of, like I said, once again, this guy in a trance-like state with an 8th grade education is saying these things verified in the iconography and symbolism and traditions of the world. So Greek, Sumerian, Babylonian, Laotian, Native American, Maori, Yoruba, Christian, and Muslim sources all claim humans were created out of the clay of the earth in supernatural fashion. That's us being created on the potter's wheel. And here's Khnum creating humans, and this Thoth writing down the age. And once again, Fuxi in China is associated with creating humans out of clay on a potter's wheel. And so is Viracocha. Now here's a quote about Viracocha's androgyny, which is well known. So the androgynous divinity Viracocha, Pachacuti Yamqui, leaves no doubt as to Viracocha's sexual duality, for above her image are the inscribed words, whether it be male or whether it be female, from the book by Irene Silverblatt. So Viracocha is known to be androgynous. He's from the German Museum. He is shown as a hybrid sometimes. His right foot has six toes right there. Another shot of Linus, right? Now, hybrid creatures are a subject that a lot of people here are interested in, a lot of the panelists are talking about, and it seems to be a reality that's occurring in time and space and has to do with extraterrestrial beings or supernatural abilities. So Cayce says this about hybrids. Many of those hybrid creatures of mythology, such as the satyrs, centaurs, and the like, are said by Cayce to have inhabited the earth from the early days of progeneration Atlantis, where they are known as the things. Basically negatively oriented, I'll get into the sons and daughters of light and darkness in a couple minutes, that the negatively oriented beings created beasts of burden, to work in the fields. And not only are they hybrid extraterrestrials, they were hybrid beings created by these androgynous gods in Atlantis, sometimes negatively oriented. And Bigfoot is supposed to be a being that's in that milieu that basically escaped after the flood, which is kind of interesting, because what is Bigfoot, you know? Is it a multidimensional being? Does it really exist here? It's kind of interesting. So I told you about Egypt, and you find the same kind of iconography that depicts hybrids all over Egypt, as well as other places in Samaria and Mexico. Manly P. Hall says, there is a profound mystery to the atmosphere and temperature of the king's chamber. It is a peculiar death-like cold which cuts the marrow of the bone. This room was a doorway between the material world and the transcendental spheres of nature. This is kind of that Napoleon story, what it's really like. While his body lay in the coffer, the soul of the neophyte soared as a human-headed hawk through the celestial realms. They had to discover firsthand the eternity of life, light, and truth, as well as the illusions of death, darkness, and sin. So these ancient sites were built as tools of enlightenment. The Assyrian, many researchers believe, is more like 10 and 12,000 years old. The sophisticated temple with granite, 200-pound blocks. You know, as a stonemason, I traveled to all the sites, Sacsayhuaman and Pumapunku. And basically, what Cayce says is that they use light and sound and levitation technology. They melted the stone oftentimes. And as a stonemason, I can tell you, sites like Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, Pumapunku, it's not a matter of time. You couldn't do it. You couldn't make the fits. It's not that you can't get a razor blade between these fits. You can't get a micron between them. And there are hundreds of miles of impervious seams that is well beyond the capability of any master mason with the tools of the time. There's no question about it. And I keep thinking that's a good idea for an episode, is get some master masons with some andesite and make me an H-block, and you can take as long as you want, and fit two together. And I believe it can't be done. And that's my, expertise as a stonemason talking, but I really feel it to be true. And Cayce has this notion about it, about light, sound, and levitation. Berosus talks about the fish god Oannes. He tells us in ancient times there was nothing but darkness and water. Strange creatures were formed in the fluid, including men born with 2 wings and some with 4 wings and 2 faces, and who had 1 body and 2 heads, and they were both masculine and feminine, and had 2 sets of sexual organs, male and female. So the fish god, who teaches the arts of civilization, tells the people this story of androgynous, strange hybrid creatures. Now it seems like that's quite odd, but here he is. You see these beings depicted everywhere with 2 and 4 wings. You find them in Egypt. You see all these hybrid creatures in Samaria and elsewhere. Here you go. These mythical creatures are portrayed everywhere in ancient times. That's in Egypt. Eusebius, priest of Caesarea in 200 AD, also says they produce double-winged beings and more people with legs of goats and horns on their heads, and others cloven-hoofed and more with horse bodies and human torsos. They also wrought bull-headed men and even other monsters whose images remain in the temple of Bellows, one next to the other. So you go to the temple of Bellows, and what do you find? I got to give credit to Eric von Daniken, my friend, who wrote an article about this. But look at the temple of Bellows. You have exactly this. Why are you creating these strange beings if there is no reality to it? So the chroniclers are saying, the mystics are saying it, and the art and symbolism is saying it. In Samaria, you have these winged demons. Pazazu, I think this dude is called. I want to hang out with him. So 2 and 4 wings over and over again. And the mystics and the chroniclers tell us that this was a literal reality. Once again, Sumerian winged beings, composite animals from a cylinder. Here is quite a police lineup of hybrid beings. Lionfish, that's a good one. And you see it everywhere. It's really striking. And oftentimes you're carrying the strange bag, which I'll get into. It's funny, I got an answer. I did a session with Michaela, and the Anunnaki came through and told me what's in the bag. So that's cool. So that, I'll get to it. winged Mayan ball player with the man bag, right? So Graham Hancock, who I love, he calls it the man bag. And people give me shit online because I keep saying man bag, and like, I don't know what else to call it, right? So a winged being from Anatolia, 6 fingers on each hand. So there are hybrid creatures with 6 fingers over and over again. That's pretty specific once again. You know, I don't want to be a freak show and give you like 700 slides, but if you were duct taped to the chair and you had to listen to me for like 10 hours, you couldn't believe how many examples of these things is on isolated Pacific islands and art and statues all around the planet. It's outrageous. Viracocha, once again, hybrid. This is a goat man. Left hand, it says museum in Stockholm, a giant left hand with 6 fingers. Here's our boy, it's not Selenius, this is, he's escaping me now, but he's the one who teaches healing. This guy, Chiron, what's his name? Is it? So he teaches, yes, the arts of healing. And he was very cool. And he was a hybrid who literally interfaced with the Greeks. And at Lefkandi, thank you. You're my new PR person. Lefkandi, 1700 BC, 6 fingers, right? So you have, that's all these specific levels. You couldn't cook up, you know, if you had 100 years, all the similarities here. So we have the Fomorians, negatively oriented sons and daughters of darkness who show up in Ireland after the flood, led by Bellows, the inspiration for Sauron and Tolkien's work. And a zoological nightmare showed up on the shores of the British Isles. And the Tuatha, look at you get the fish guy, you get all the freaks. And the Tuatha De Danann were the positively oriented sons and daughters of light who taught the Druids the mystical teachings and the immortality of the soul. And they had these ancient wars that are chronicled in Irish mythology. And there are real-life examples of these beings and where they lived. Tory Island in Ireland, that is like the destroyed ruins of the castle or the tower of Bellows. And Tolkien studied all this. And it gets into the Twin Towers and these dark forces. And he's giving this version of what happened in the British Isles in deep antiquity. And these beings showed up from Mauritius and all these lost lands with golden weapons and cauldrons and magical items and supernatural abilities. And they were portrayed as gods and amphibious beings and androgynous. Once again, it's really awesome. The Boneyard of the Bazaar that rewrites us Celtic past to include hybrid animal monster myths. This is a new article a couple years ago. Cow with horse's legs among finds that throw light onto the ancient mind. So the discovery of a series of animal skeletons near Winterbourne, Kingston, and Dorset raises the possibility that that Britain's ancient Celtic population had hybrid animal monster myths similar to those of the ancient Greeks, Mesopotamians, and Egyptians. Once again, you got to go out of your way to like put a bunch of parts together to display that hybrids are part of your mythology. I think it's really cool that science is starting to verify these controversial subjects. The bones discovered in Dorset by archaeologists appear to have been deliberately rearranged by Iron Age Britons in order to create hybrid beasts, half one creature and half another. And there's the amalgam of bones there. So in Germany, in a cave, 40,000-year-old lion man was found. Altamira Cave in Spain, between 12 and 38,000 years ago, you have a gazelle hybrid with 6 fingers. You have the inspiration for Picasso's Minotaur, this hybrid being right here. This is in Laosso, 35,000 BC. This is my boy, Werner Herzog. If you ever watch Cave of Forgotten Dreams, that is an awesome special. He made the documentary about this cave that was found that has all these incredible cave paintings, and a rock slide preserved it. In the Chauvet Cave, there's a painting of a bison embracing the lower part of a naked female body. Why does Pablo Picasso, who had no knowledge of the Charvet cave, used exactly the same motif in a series of drawings of the Minotaur and the woman. Very, very strange. And you talk about collective unconscious, these themes show up, you know, Frankenstein monsters and vampires, and even Anne Rice wrote about a parent race that had 6 fingers and 6 toes that basically birthed us. So it's in the collective unconscious, you can't get away from it. So the Dead Sea Scrolls are very interesting because Cayce died in 45. 3 years later, they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. A large number of references to Belial. Belial is the leader of the Sons of Darkness that Cayce keeps talking about over and over again. Are evidenced in the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered at Qumran from 1948. So he specifically states that Belial is the leader of the Sons of Darkness and the ancient war between the law of one and the sons and daughters of light. Apologize. You know, basically resulted in the destruction of Atlantis. So here in the Dead Sea Scrolls, you hear the exact same name of Belial, and then there is a scroll in the war of the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness, one of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Belial is the leader of the Sons of Darkness. 3 years after Cayce dies, and he wrote and talked prolifically, I should say, he channeled prolifically about this negative being. So Hall says, according to the secret tradition, it was during the later Atlantean epoch that black magic and sorcery dominated the esoteric schools, resulting in bloody sacrificial rites, gruesome idolatry, which ultimately overthrew the Atlantean Empire and penetrated the Aryan religious world. So Blavatsky says the same types of things about this ancient war of light and dark that's replaying itself out now. And to continue the tradition, we have to add that the class of Hierophants was divided into 2 distinct categories: instructed by the sons of God, and those who were initiated into the divine doctrine of pure revelation, and others who inhabited the lost continent of Atlantis. This is a little long, I apologize, but this is really getting to the root of what was going on. While the former walked the path of divine instructors and acquiring the knowledge by degrees, learned at the same time to discern the evil from the good, the born adepts of the Atlantis blindly follow the insinuations of the great and invisible dragon, the king Thev-Atat. Under the evil insinuations of their demon, the nation became wicked, basically saying that there was this ancient conflict that existed in Atlantis, and that was what destroyed the continent behind the scenes. So, you know, I don't want to get too much into it, but it's a really interesting. Oh, sure, no problem. Yeah, I'm always like, am I talking too much? Is it too much info up here? Do I suck? You know. I have to be self-deprecating. It's part of my act. Yeah. Yes. Oh, I forgot. No, I'm going to tell you. You got to wait for the setup. You know, you got to get all the weird information first, and then you're like, oh my God. So it's funny because, you know, I took a lot of heat for like my TEDx video and for talking about these ideas. And where I'm from, you catch a beating if somebody's running their mouth. And I could, you know, whatever. You know, I usually lead with kindness, and I try to share things that are interesting. Like, I think whatever you make of this, I think you're out of your mind if you say there's no story here, right? So I would catch a lot of heat, and there was a bunch of people who are pseudo-skeptics. They're not real skeptics. All they do is denigrate everyone. They critique shows. They get on people's books, and they're a cottage industry of like losers who don't make enough dopamine and have to get off by like bad-mouthing people. So I got caught in that, and I was really defensive and like entrenched in this orientation, like I got to prove the case, you know. So I understand, and you know, I never really bought into extraterrestrials and things when I was younger, and I was kind of the arrogant know-it-all. So I can forgive that. But one of the main points that they make is like, oh, you people can't deal with reality, so you have to believe in this fantasy world, and you know, where there's ghosts and fairies, and you can't deal with the hard truth of this place, which is in reverse, because a lot of the people who are in the academic disciplines are they have like PTSD. And I'm not trying to diss them, I'm just saying they're of a low vibrational state. They are afraid. They need uniformitarianism to exist in geology. Everything has to be slow and predictable or I'm going to lose my shit, you know? So that is the orientation of many academics. And they are scared to take on these ideas. So the people here, the people who at least give a chance to this are actually much more courageous. So Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, I'm not a real big Game of Thrones guy, but anyways, like the Lord of the Rings idea is really resonates with so many people. It's like a lost world. It's where we incarnated. Yes, right? And what I find is a lot of like, I'll just say it, like Robert Schoch and Hancock and Andrew Collins, and I feel like a lot of us all reincarnated from Lemuria and Atlantis, coming back telling the same story. And like some, ironworker sees this video and it's like, this guy's on acid, But I think it's really, it resonates with people. So this mythological idea is in the collective unconscious for a reason, is my point. So I'll go anywhere for a good story, including some weird places. And I do lots of ayahuasca and San Pedro and medicine retreats with shamans and wisdom keepers. And what I found was it just opens you up. I don't recommend it for everyone. It's a rough ride, man. It's just like you face your traumas. You have to purify yourself to vicariously be sent to higher dimensions. I like to do the hard day-to-day work, but I also want to hear from the wisdom keepers. And they all tell me the same strange and specific and metaphysical story of the past. Another verification for this odd story that I'm telling. Stop the ride, I want to get off, I'm sorry if you've ever taken like too many mushrooms or whatever, I think you can understand what I'm talking about. So, my boy Terence McKenna, psychedelics are illegal, not because a loving government is concerned that you may jump out a third-story window. They're illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally lay down models of behavior and information processing. They open you up to the possibility that everything you know is wrong. Now, Johns Hopkins has been doing studies on the efficacy of psilocybin to treat people in hospice, to treat depression. Like they're classing it as a wonder drug now, for real. This isn't wishful thinking. They're doing a lot of study on psychedelics and their ability to heal and rewire the brain, which is amazing. And, I agree, I've done my share. There you go. So, I'm putting this on Graham Hancock because he calls them man bags, but these hybrid androgynous beings are often very stylish, and they carry this bag. I don't know what the hell to call it, but once again, winged beings, right? Androgynous winged beings. What's that? I know. Okay. So you see it everywhere. Flower of Life too, yep. So here I am at the British Museum. Just amazing. It's not just Samaria. I'll show you examples, We all know about... What's that? Oh, I'll get to it. So here's some of the early excavations of Samaria. One of the things is that Atlantis teaches advanced geometry and mathematics. And they found this tablet recently, scientists deciphered the 322 Plimpton tablet after 100 years from Samaria, and they realized that describes the shapes of right-angle triangles using a novel kind of trigonometry based on ratios, not angles and circles. Mansfield said it is a fascinating mathematical work that demonstrates undoubted genius. The sophisticated mathematics of and geometry of the Sumerians was mind-blowing. We know that. And they specifically state that Oannes is the one who taught him the geometrical knowledge, which I'll show you right here. This is from Berosus. He made them distinguish, this is the fish god, the seeds of the earth, and show them how to collect the fruits. And when the sun had set, this being, Oannes, retired again to the sea and passed the nights in the deep, for he was amphibious. The being was accustomed to pass the day among men, but took no food at that season, and he gave them insight into the letters of science and arts of every kind. He taught them to construct cities, found temples, to compile laws, and explain to them the principles of geometric knowledge. That is from Berosus. The constant of Nineveh. This number, what is this number doing on a cuneiform tablet? Now, David Wilcock has also written about this. So there's a Sumerian clay tablet discovered by George Smith in Nineveh. It contains tablets of advanced astronomical data. One table contained a numerical constant called the Nineveh constant. It was recognized by French mathematician Maurice Chatelain, who worked for NASA. He wrote about it. Here is the tablet right here from the Library of Ashburnipal, 1700 BC. Here are some of the clay tablets at the British Museum. Wait a sec, I got a man bag right there. Every period of revolution, this is what Chatelain says, every period of revolution or conjunction of the solar system bodies calculated by the constant of Nineveh corresponded exactly down to several decimal points with the values given in the modern table of U.S. astronomers. I have not been able to find even a single period of revolution or conjunction of a solar system, planet, or satellite that would not be an exact fraction down to the fourth decimal point of the great constant of the solar system. This amazing mathematical formula is on a Sumerian tablet. And what did the Sumerians themselves tell us? Look at this right here. They say that Oannes, the fish god, brought him this knowledge, just like Viracocha and Fuxi in China and on and on. The number of 60 was fascinating as it was the base number of the Assyrian mathematical system. Some believe because the Anunnaki might have 6 fingers and 6 toes. So the sexagesimal system is used in Sumeria. Like 6 fingers and 6 toes. So then you go on the other side of the Atlantic, and Quetzalcoatl, who is androgynous, has the bag. And you see these all around the world. Just a couple examples. And there's hybrid beings on the bags too. I'm shopping for man bags here. Hybrid being, engaged in the God self icon symbolism, which I'll get to, that Richard Cassar writes about. It's an ancient metaphysical symbol. A hybrid being with 6 fingers on a man bag. Once again, J.J. Ainsworth, my friend, found this one. So you see these different levels of specificity is what I'm pointing to. That's well beyond coincidence. This crocodile guy from Colombia, I think it's 200 BC, he has his bag. Wing ball player, hybrid, once again in the Mayan tradition. This dude, I don't know what's going on, but he has that, yeah, right? Even at Göbekli Tepe, the oldest site on the planet, I think there's older ones, but now known, 12,600-year-old site in Turkey. Now what they found is between 20 and 50 concentric rings of massive T-shaped megaliths in a time that was thought impossible to build these things. 12,600 years old. If you watch Ancient Aliens, and Andrew Collins talks about it, there are 3 bags at one of the pillars, number 43 there. In fact, I will get into, what I talked about was the most ancient statues represent polydactylism, 6 fingers and 6 toes, and androgyny. And there are researchers who believe the T-shaped pillars at Göbekli Tepe are in fact these androgynous gods who showed up after the flood, which is interesting from an archaeological viewpoint. So here's Gaziantep on the right. That's in the Turkey area. Here is the Nomo androgynous being. These 2-headed statues show up in context, 10, 12, 13,000 years old. This is Ered Ziffer once again, the Israeli archaeologist. I would like to suggest that these statues represented mythical ancestors from the dawn of mankind, and that the 2-headed busts among them represent the first being the androgynous prototype of humanity. Actually, I got to stop because I don't think I get to the man bags. So I did a reading with Michaela, and she said, or the Anunnaki said, that the bag is actually a technology that grounds these beings in our environment, in our atmosphere, and allows them to exist here temporarily. So these wisdom keepers show up, and they have a form of technology with them that grounds them here, and that they showed up after the flood. You know, some people think it's flood survivors, which may be the case, but it seemed that there was an extraterrestrial revisitation to repromulgate society after the last cataclysm, like 12,000 years ago. So that is what her teachers told me about the bag. I was hoping it was psychedelics, but it wasn't. Yeah. Well, yeah, I was going to say I'll answer after. So, Hayuk, 6500 BC, Androgynous Statue. Kilisic, this is from Mark Verhoeven, an academic, wrote a paper 2001, said that this 12,000-year-old statue, contemporaneous with Göbekli Tepe, is androgynous, displaying male and female body parts. That's a sober academic claiming this once again in an academic paper. So the oldest statues in the world are representing these odd things. This hybrid creature exists at the temple at Saint-Lurfa, a 13,000-year-old like hybrid creature, and something is being birthed out of it. Once again, you know, these bizarre stories are being verified by the iconography and science. Now we have Urfa Man, we have Kilisic. They're showing these androgynous attributes in the hands around the waist. And you find this all around the world, like at Easter Island. Whatever this means, it is an ancient symbol of some sort. And here is the androgynous statue here. This dude's definitely not androgynous. It's a statue from Indonesia. And there's this ancient culture that nobody knows about with these incredible statues all over the place. But he has that same stance, if you will. So the God Self icon is written about by Richard Casaro. It's basically the staff god or the animal god, and it's holding two beings here. And what's interesting is, I'll show you examples. You find it all around the world, right? The two staffs. But in India, they just found the oldest example on the planet. The discovery of carvings believed to be tens of thousands of years old. Greatly excited archaeologists, this is like last year, who believe they hold clues to a previously unknown civilization. Flood survivors displaying the God Self icon. And you see it everywhere around the world. Look at it. Just amazing. And Richard Casaro is a buddy of mine. He's done all the research. Nigeria, Native Americans, you find it everywhere. You find it in esoteric circles. You know, the staff god, the balance of opposites. Right there, that's pretty specific, right? Bolivia and Peru, in Egypt, both androgynous beings, and some whacked out stonework too. I'm sorry, you're right. He's not androgynous. In the Mexican Museum, you find an amalgam of all these bizarre traits. This is Kukulkan, who is known to be androgynous. He has fish scales, seven-headed serpents are coming out of his head, and he has the bag once again. I will get into the seven-headed serpent, another layer of specificity that is really strange. This is from Siberia that was recently found. I explain the seven-headed serpent is found everywhere in ancient literature. King Arthur slays the seven-headed dragon. This is from Sumeria. The Nagas, Buddha is protected by the seven serpents. And once again, you see seven serpents is pretty specific. You find it everywhere. You find it in medieval tapestries. And the dragon of the serpent is what's represented. The Gnostics have their own seven-headed dragon. Manly P. Hall wrote this about it. In Indian symbolism, the serpent, especially the great serpent, corroborates other evidence pointing to the presence of the mysteries of the North American continent. The flying serpent is the Atlantean token of the initiate, the seven-headed snake. Represents the seven great Atlantean islands and also the seven great prehistoric schools of esoteric philosophy. Blavatsky has this to say: they are all seven-headed, the dragons and serpents of antiquity, one head for each race, and every head with seven hairs on it, as the allegory has it. The earliest initiates and adepts, or the wise men, for whom it is claimed that they were initiated in the mysteries of nature by the universal mind, represents the highest angels, were named the serpents of wisdom and dragons. The Druid priests were called the serpents. This is Yogananda, if you've ever read his stuff. It's pretty awesome. So Jesus went very deep in teaching that appears on the surface to be simple, much deeper than most people understand, that he taught the entire yoga system, the scientific method of union with God, as evidenced in the book of Revelation, in the mystery of the 7 stars and 7 churches with their 7 angels and 7 golden candlesticks. God realization is attained by opening the 7 seals of these centers of spiritual perception to attain mastery over all astral powers of life and death, through which the soul ascends to liberation. That's what Yogananda said. So this is all pointing to this ancient Atlantean school of philosophy, the law of one. We understand the chakra system, we understand ascension, and basically, I think, undoing is where it's at. It's getting rid of what doesn't work. And, I feel like these teachings are sent down from these Atlantean temple priests, and they're being articulated by these masters all throughout history. Jesus was very cool. Buddha, Lao Tzu, the serpent in Revelation right here, 7-headed dragon. You find the symbolism everywhere, and it's associated with basically these spiritual teachings that go back to Atlantis. And I was at Chichen Itza recently, right? And I'm at the ball court with Hugh Newman, my buddy, and we were on a tour. And I got drawn to right under the hoop, and I'm like, what's there, So what I find is the ball player is nailing, and he has 7 serpents coming out of his head. And I'm like, oh, because I was studying the 7-headed serpent, I couldn't believe, here is an example. Now, the orthodox idea is like he got his head cut off because he lost the ball game. But no, these were, basically rituals to free yourself of all negativity. There were some dark orientations in Mesoamerica, but this wasn't the case. And Hun Bat's Men has this to say. I thought I was the only one who saw it. He wrote about it too. In his book, Mind, Secrets of Science and Religion, he concludes that the Mayan religion was based around a system of 7 energy centers, very similar to the Hindu chakras. He also notes that the Buddha was bitten by a 7-headed serpent at the river of initiation. This serpent is called Chapat in India. Curiously, the people of Yucatan, Mexico, have the same word for it too. Refers to the 7-headed serpent, just like in India. Now, Hun Bat's Men talks about the 7-headed serpent and what it really means at the ball court of Chichen Itza. Once again, high metaphysical teachings that are ubiquitous. And this is what Cayce says. Entity was in the Atlantean land when there were these activities just prior to the second upheaval in that land. The entity was among the children of the law of one. So that's our orientation, right? Service to others for the good of all. We get caught up in, sometimes looking into conspiracies like I talk about. But, these teachings and the masters are telling us to go within and to heal the mind at the level of mind and the level of choosing. Science, once again, is verifying these things. Particle and quantum physics experiments keep showing that physical reality is little more than a subjective virtual illusion, with some suggesting that the only thing that really exists in its own right is consciousness. The thing that is stumping researchers is who or what designed the consciousness-responsive virtual world we all take so seriously. Disclosure, we did it. So science has taken us down the road of realization to the point where space-time and matter are seen as subjective effects or as secondary manifestations of something more real. The bravest of the scientists suggest that, based on the evidence, consciousness is primary and that we see what seems to be reality as a secondary manifestation. That's the thing. You don't want to take your movie character too seriously. You rented a body for however many years. Think transpersonally of all your lifetimes and your larger self. Don't get caught in all the petty distractions in your life. Try to think in a larger way, because that is the reality of it. And all the masters said the same thing. Lao Tzu was a true master. If you want to awaken all of humanity, then awaken all of yourself. If you want to eliminate suffering in the world, then eliminate all that is dark and negative in yourself. Truly, the greatest gift you have is to give, is that of your own self-transformation. And I agree with that. You can blah, 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 talk all you want. It's done at the level of the mind. All the healing takes place there. That doesn't mean you don't take action in the world. but you don't go to a peace rally and like, hit somebody over the head with a sign, and you want to practice peace in your mind. And I love that Buddhist saying, to judge another is like drinking poison and waiting for someone else to die, So Rumi, if you're ever bummed out, read some Rumi. He was enlightened. This is what happens. You die. I'm not there, that's for sure. But you dial into this joyful bliss that's permanent, that Jesus and Buddha and Mary Magdalene and all these masters dialed into. And that is the goal. If you want to come back here to this 3D, circus, do it in a state where you are enlightened and you can be of service. Not come back with all your weird hang-ups and problems and just be part of the problem. So this is what Rumi is talking about. If light is in your heart, you will find your way home. The good news is the end state is incomprehensible and glorious and oneness without separation, eternal. Like all that we experience as negative and dark is a temporary, erroneous manifestation. So it kind of sucks when you got to deal with the troubles of this world, for instance. But sometimes you skip to the finish line, right? And you get revelation. And you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I am that. And then you kind of go back into your body and you're like, where did it go? And some people chase after that, like the Gnostics would put their heads through the veil or try to like experience that. And like 3 seconds of that is just unbelievable. And that's the good news. I try to give my experience and be the hopeful life coach, like the end state, oh my God, it's unreal. And that's what we are in reality. So it's, we're all in developmental steps. And I'm thrilled there's so many people here making this tough effort day after day. It's like, this is great, right? Then I got to go back to work on Monday. And like my boss is a pain in the ass. And this, and to take these teachings and to reorient yourself through the trials and tribulations of life and get to this state. I watched the Richard Gere narrated the Buddha special on PBS last night. And I watched that. It was so beautiful. And they have all these poets, and you can just see that the state that is achieved of what we really are. And the monkey mind wants like trivia everywhere, and I'm guilty of it. I'm Mr. Like, I got all these facts and figures, like the Rain Man of ancient mysteries, and I can't take care of my basic needs. But it's like my superpower is like remembering erroneous facts. But the point is, it all comes down to silence and abiding in the shade. And I'll get to my boy Ramana Maharshi in a second. And this is when you are in joyful communion, what happens. You are one with all there is. And even if it's a temporary manifestation you see, you are one with it. You are fine with it. You're at peace because you know what the truth is. So Ramana Maharshi was a true master, lived about 70 years ago. And Lakshmi was a cow that he said was enlightened. A being that was literally enlightened. And Lakshmi used to go in the temple and take a shit and like knock everything over. And everybody was mad at Lakshmi. And he was like, no. There's a master here that you need to learn from. And it was, Denise would probably enjoy this if she were here. And after Lakshmi died, they made a samadhi for her, meaning that she had achieved enlightenment. That when you make a samadhi, it means the person has awoken from the dream of time and space. And they are an awakened being. So he's wonderful. He has these videos. David Godman talks about him. This guy was like off the charts, like a modern day Jesus or Buddha. And there are avatars and enlightened beings around, that are around the planet at this point. So Plato, once again, this is what Plato says. He says some other strange things about androgyny Atlantis. He says we should think of the most authoritative part of our soul as a guardian spirit given by God, living in the summit of the body, which can properly be said to lift us from earth towards our home in heaven. For we are creatures not of the earth, but in heaven where the soul was first born. So Plato specifically states that as well. The eyes are the window to your soul, Shakespeare. It's what I like is a thought system you can bring everywhere. And all this information is great, but you need to metabolize it and integrate it into your life. So I will offer things that I do that allow, like right now, if somebody like whipped something at me and said, you're an idiot, I wouldn't react to that. I would say, ooh, why did I attract that? What's going on in here that's showing up there? And I forgive it quantumly, not like I'm perfect at it, but that's what you do over and over again. I see actually an enlightened being, I'll give him much love, Dick Orton in Greenfield, Mass. My brother and I go to see him 15 years every week, and the guy's brilliant. And what's funny is he's funny as hell, too. He's not, I always thought, like, I have to emulate the Dalai Lama, right, to be fake spiritual. Instead of, I got a foul-mouthed teacher who's enlightened. It's a riot, And he taught us this art of eye gazing. So what you do is, basically, there's a bunch of articles online. You sit next to someone. Like my brother and I will sit couch in the morning. We'll do it for half an hour before we go to work. I'll sit with my teacher in 2 chairs, hold hands, eye gaze, drop out of the head. You feel that energetically? Yeah, right? It's not fake news. It's like legit, And it's great. And it's just like, it empties the mind, because I have a tough time meditating. So eye gazing is wonderful. It's a really great activity. You could do it in a mirror, too. It's, I'm telling you, it's life-changing. And there's many articles online. And the other thing I'll point to is my buddy Gary Renard wrote a series of books. And he's a non-dualist that studies the Course in Miracles. And he gives a thought system. Whether you believe all the implications of the Course, basically what it's saying is there is blissful oneness is our reality, and we're having a thought experiment. Like, what would it be like to be separate? So you need time, you need death, you need separate bodies. It's kind of, I don't know if this is the best experiment in the world, but explains why the universe and time and space was made, and what's going to happen to it, and how you awaken from it, basically. And he teaches quantum forgiveness over and over again, because every thought you have comes back to you. It sounds simplistic, but any hateful thought, you think you're escaping it and dodging it, it's all coming back to you, because there's only one mind, which is a sobering concept. Like, all the things I think are coming back to me. So you pick out a political figure, right? And it's like, Michaela made this great point yesterday. Like, people say they post stuff on social media to get a hit, that like, this article is going to piss people off. Or it's going to take a jab at my political enemies. That energy is out of alignment. And it's more, you look at these people and you're being hypocritical, because we've all lived different incarnations where we're these weird manifestations of asleep people. Even in this lifetime, I've done so many weird and embarrassing things. Good God. I wouldn't want anybody checking out my past, And we all have that, So it's not like to denigrate yourself for what you're doing. It's more to forgive whatever you see on the screen of the world, and that's the message you're sending yourself. It's a simple technology you can bring everywhere, And you forget, and you're like, oh man, and then you remember. And that's why this is consistent mind training. And my brother and I, we were decathletes and then coaches, and a gift out of that was rigorous training, mind discipline, over and over again. And that's really a great thing to apply. So that is my recommendation, if you will. This version of history answers most of the questions regarding the enigmas described by esoteric teachings. Oral traditions, myth, and legend. Modern science answers none of it. That's all the point I'm making. I think it's worth looking into. And basically, this would be nothing more than a kind of an interesting story if there wasn't a metaphysical end. And that's why this is a great conference. It's like literally learning techniques to raise your vibration, to liberate yourself from guilt and anxiety. It's not like, oh, this dude cornered me, and he's just, like talking about some conspiracy for 45 minutes, and he's not like catching all the social cues like, I want to get the hell out of here. I've been to conferences where it's just like that kind of, and that's fine because it's a lower developmental step. But this is a different gathering of people whose game is really tight, who have gone through so much difficulty to get to this place, who are comfortable being a group of like reincarnated temple priests and everything else. And it's like, hey, I am what I am. And I appreciate that. And all I'd say is that a consistent thought system is good to carry around. So I appreciate you putting up with my lunacy. I take feedback or whatever. I don't know if there's time for questions, but thank you very much.
I'm not even sure you'll be able to ask my question, but you're the person here that's closest that may be able to, because you've done so much research. A lot of what you've shown us is physical, tangible evidence on sculptures and different archaeology that you've found. Have you come across anything that shows a connection to Down syndrome and the extra chromosome?
No, that's an interesting question, though.
And it's okay if you don't, but
yeah, no, like looking at genetics, like beetle-bar syndrome is gigantism, and right next to it is polydactylism, like in the genetic code. So 6 fingers to 6 toes. Yeah, so I have a friend who's a scientist who pointed that out to me, that genetics, like polydactylism, is dominant, not regressive. There's all this like weirdness in the genetic blueprints, and it'd be a great place for somebody with that skill set to look at. I completely agree. And Gary Renard actually talks about Down syndrome, and I got a buddy who has Down syndrome. And, you know, everybody has their problems, but there's like this joyful disconnection from nonsense that people often have with Down syndrome. It's like, oh, I think I'm living such a good life, you know, being whatever I am, where this being is in this blissful state much more than everybody else. And it's like pets just sit there in silence in the one, abiding in sanity for so long. They're just so patient. And it's just like, and we think, you know, we're doing it right or something. There are these great examples everywhere. And I agree. I really have this heartfelt connection with people with Down syndrome. I really appreciate where they're at. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.